Hey, everybody, I want you to join me in welcoming Gabriella Ferrara on the Advisory Board podcast. She's kind of a rock star here, guys. So I'm excited to have her join us from Scorpion. Let me do a quick intro, Gabriella, then I'll turn it over to you. I'd love for them to tell them a little bit about yourself.
Perfect.
So Gabriella has been in the industry and doing all sorts of cool things, guys. And so I really hope that you get some insights from her today about marketing trends and things that you should be looking at and questions executive teams and franchise systems should be asking, because she's been with PwC. It was FranSuite, right? Yeah, FranSuite. She's been recognized as one of the 100 influential women in the franchising, the franchise millennial power list. And it's a valid credential and recognition, because Gabriella is all over the place. She's an expert on panels all the time. She's constantly hosting things. She's constantly being invited to podcasts. So I hope you guys will listen in. Right now, you're the VP of regional sales for franchising within Scorpion, which essentially means, guys, the buck stops with her. She knows the franchising industry really well. And so I'm going to stop talking. Gabrielle, why don't you fill in the gaps that I left out? Tell them a little bit more about you and about Scorpion, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's funny that you call me a rock star. I guess I put on the right shirt today. I'm wearing Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So very fitting. But thank you for having me, Dave. As he mentioned, part of Scorpion. I'm our VP of Regional Sales. I recently joined them during the pandemic, so I'm about 6 months in, which is awesome. They are a great company to work for. For those who don't know, Scorpion's a full digital marketing agency that focuses on the consumer and the franchise development side. We do everything, and our goal is to really convert and engage people on your websites and to make sure that we actually close the loop on the ROI. So we handle everything digital for you. We work with about 130 plus brands, over 10,000 franchisees. So we have a lot of experience in the industry for sure. And then we also serve a lot of other SMB services and things of that nature. So perfect synergy as I'm talking to Dave today with his company as well. As you mentioned, I've been in franchising for a few years now, but I've definitely made a big splash. So I helped bring our FranSuite product to market in the franchise industry. And quickly, ran the conference circuit and made sure I knew everyone that I needed to know, and everyone knew me. And it's clearly has worked out and panned out. And I'm happy to share with you some, tips and tricks, especially as we're, about to start Q2 of 2021. I think there's a lot to have learned from the past year in terms of digital trends and technology trends. And I'm excited to see as it progresses the rest of this year and this future. So I'm happy to share my insights with you all.
Yeah. And guys, Gabrielle is one of those ones where she, if you want to know what's happening or what's changing, I'd recommend following and staying in touch with her, because she always seems to be kind of at that bleeding edge of, oh, by the way, the world's pivoting. Gabrielle is talking about it. You should probably pay attention to her. So I don't know how you do it, Gabrielle, but you're always on top of it. And I appreciate the thought leadership that you share with everybody.
Thank you. Got to have a pulse and everything.
Yeah, you got to, especially if you're in marketing, because that is a dynamic space. Let's talk 100%. About that for a minute. So there are so many different aspects of marketing that a franchise system should be paying attention to, or even a small to medium business, right? But one of those is the one that everybody hates to talk about because it's kind of squishy, but it's brand awareness. Do you mind, tell us a little bit about what you're observing, what's changing there? And I'd love to get some insights from you that we can share with people about how do we have actionable stuff we can focus on within brand awareness. It seems like it's so ambiguous to so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too, because I think what everyone has realized in the past year is when you're putting together your marketing strategy, your go-to-market strategy, you have to be very nimble and you have to be agile in terms of iteration, what's working, what's not working. There's so many things that we've been learning with all the data we're consuming, and brand awareness is something that pretty much stays with you all the time. And what I think we found, especially in the past year, is people who've had a really strong brand story and message really zeroed in on that. And for those who might have not, they realized we quickly need to have some pillars. We need to have things that speak to our brand, that resonate with our customers. So something that I think that you always have to challenge your leadership team is, if you don't have a brand story, what is our brand story? What is our message that needs to come across? And if we did, that wasn't as strong, has it changed? Has something drastically changed? Obviously, this past year, things have drastically changed. But, has our brand story and the way that we want to make sure externally and internally, I think people don't realize that brand awareness starts from within. And you also have to believe in your own brand story and your message. Because it all ties in together. What's your vision for your company? If you hire employees, they need to be bought in, and just like your customers are bought into it. So I think that we've seen it a lot with, honing in. I think Massage Heights is a great example. They have such a great, they call their actual massage centers retreats. And they want you to feel like you are coming into a retreat. And that is part of, you're taking away, you're relaxing. It's part of who they are. And I think it sounds so simple, but something just being called a retreat versus just a massage parlor or salon, it just has a different connotation. And I think that people need to realize, same thing, starts with within. That's how they call themselves. And then furthermore, that's how they externally face. So I think that it's just important to challenge your leadership team, make sure you have a story and a message and that people believe in it.
Yeah, and I don't, if you don't mind, I want to riff on that for a second, because we did a podcast, I don't know, almost a year ago with Jed Morley from Backstory Branding, and he spent a lot of time diving into this, what is your brand promise that you're communicating as part of your branding, and then how do you deliver on that brand promise? One of the things I see all the time, for example, you said Massage Sites, or what was the group you mentioned?
Massage Heights.
Massage Heights, thank you. If that's their brand promise, right, that you're going to come to a retreat and you're going to have this great experience, and then I walk in and it's like Berber carpet, and it's cheap plastic chairs in the lobby, and the receptionist is a lady named Edge, and she's been smoking 3 packs a day, I'm not getting the retreat vibe. And no offense to anyone named Madge or someone who smokes, but you know what I mean, right? There's a certain, yes, you're gonna expect a beautiful young woman to greet you who looks like she belongs on a magazine, or a very sharp young man. I feel like I'm being sexist. I don't mean to be here, but there's an expectation of that brand promise. And now that happens a lot when at least I observe a lot with home service companies, where they're walking through the door, this is our brand promise. We're this pristine outfit. We purify and sanitize your home. And then somebody walks up to the door to clean my house, and they're coughing and sneezing and their pants are dirty. I'm like,
yeah,
I don't want you in my house. You're breaking the brand promise to me. So branding, I feel I think you crushed it, but these are key things that anyone should be asking is, what's our promise? How do we deliver on it? How do we actually execute? And the challenging thing for franchises is, how does Bob in Kentucky execute on our brand promise we designed for the system? That's
correct.
Tough. That's tough.
Yeah. The consistency aspect for sure.
Yeah. And that's where friends like Dean over at Franchise Blast come in, but we can talk about that. Your territory audits. Let's talk about audience, because this is something that I think you and I were chatting before, is pivoted pretty fast, and some people missed it and are still trying to catch up. But knowing your audience, your ideal client profile, your avatar, your personas, how have you seen that been impacted in the last year? Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, so obviously it's been drastic. As we said, there's been a lot of marketing innovation and technology innovation, especially in the past year, that I think expedited due to the circumstances we fell in as a world. So I think that same thing, looking at your data, the questions you need to be asking is, have your demographics changed? Has your buying personas changed? Has your existing demographics buying personas changed? It sounds very simple, but sometimes we have to go back to the basics and we have to reevaluate that data that we have coming in. The easiest examples I was just sharing with Dave is, especially within QSR and home services, right? What did we have to do that has changed? We had a demographic that was about 60 plus for QSRs or restaurants in general, having to get comfortable with online ordering. That is something that space thought would take at least still 5 years. And now they realize, okay, we need to make sure that the user experience is just as pleasant for that age demographic, because now their buying persona has changed. They're not just picking up the phone, they are online ordering, whether it's through your website or through an app. On the flip side, with home services, Dave's spot on, that demographic had to get comfortable with, if you were doing an estimate or you need to show someone what's happening in your house, whether it's pipes or HVAC, you need to get comfortable with putting your screen and actually showing the person what's happening. things that they didn't necessarily seem that would be even a problem or something they'd have to even think about. But people had to get out of their comfort zone and really rely heavily on technology advances. And, a lot of the websites or apps or everything that's been created that maybe wasn't, more of your customers are relying on it in a wide range of demographics. So I think that going back to the basics and reevaluating who's your actual target audience and has their buying personas changed or their behaviors changed, right? Like we are on our phones more than ever before. And, we might not be using cable TV the same way that we used to, we're using connected TV or streaming apps. So I think that there's just been a lot of behavioral changes that every demographic has faced in the past year. And I think we all need to sit back and look at our data and make sure that we're hitting our customers where they are, and that our experience when they are our customer is as seamless as it was before.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people still think in kind of archaic terms about where our customers are, right? You're talking about new channels of marketing that are available. I was in a roundtable that I was leading over at the IFA event a month and a half ago. And a lady brought up, Pandora and like getting into these captive, listening apps and how there's a really good opportunity for her brand as they're selling franchises. It was mostly about Fran Dev lead gen and lead conversion. And it was a cool conversation, but everybody in the room was like, I've never thought about that. I'm like, but we all listen to Pandora all day long. Come on. Like, yeah, that's a great spot or Spotify, whatever you listen to, but also digital access points. Are we engaging over text message? Because everybody's on their phone all the time. 90% of people see every text message within 3 minutes. Like it's very engaging. But I also see people very clumsily stumbling into these new media. Like, oh, I'm going to text everyone, and they send out 5-paragraph text messages to all their clients. You're like, holy mackerel! Like,
you're like, delete.
Yeah, I know. I would never read it. And my mom doesn't even send me text messages that long anymore, right? Even she knows. My mom's a really smart lady, but she's in the older demographic now where you'd expect them to be a little less savvy. But business owners have got to engage where people are at, but in the way that feels natural in that medium. You don't find people in social media and then send them long, 3-4 paragraph messages. You engage them in little pieces, and you anyway. I could dialogue.
Spot on.
But you probably have more insights to share in that. Could you mind? I'm sure you see a lot of times where you, in your role, where you see people who are clumsily trying to get into different digital media channels. Do you have any examples you could share with us of, no names, please, but maybe an example of how it's done wrong and even how it's done right, or things you guys do to help people do it right?
Yeah, I would say things that we do, I'll focus more on how we help people to do it right, is our goal as a company is that we're not just an agency. We really focus on the technology that enables that. And so with the platform and the technology that we built, our goal is that we are having a lot of data, we have insights to provide you. And with that, we are able to actually share, hey, geographical location in Austin. What we've noticed is most people are using Yelp as their form of channel to look at, vendors or look at potential home services types of, people. And that's where you need to be, right? And so what we do is we take the approach of, with all the data and the insights we have across our customer base, we try to be smarter about, okay, what would actually be the channel that makes the most sense for your brand and where you are. So even taking it a step further, like not just demographic, but also geographical location, because brands in Austin could be interacting with social channels very differently in Dallas, very differently in Houston. So I think that's the other thing people don't realize is there's target audience, demographic, buying persona, but there's also geographical. That's a huge type of target audience you need to take into account. I mean, I'm from the New York City tri-state area. The way I do things is very different than people in the Midwest, than people in California. The channels I use are just different. And sometimes there's channels that are just focused on your tri-state area or just the Midwest, right? So I think it goes back to, whether it's a specific example or not, you really need to look at your data and your insights, but also don't just focus on the demographic aspect. You have to focus geographically as well. And I'd say that's probably something where you see brands slip up because they think, oh, our demographic across our brand is XYZ. But then they don't think about how they're different in those geographical markets. And that's where they miss the mark, right? So I think that's something you always have to be smart about.
And you've got to be monitoring, right? Because here's a random but interesting data point. 10% of the population of California has moved out in the last year. 4 million people have left the state, right?
Yeah.
They're scattering all over the place, mostly like Rocky Mountain, United States, right? Like I live in Utah, tons of people are moving here, but realize that because of remote living and all sorts of things and people wanting to get out of the metros, the population bases are shuffling everywhere. So even what you knew 12 months ago isn't good enough
100%.
because if you look at the demographic in Salt Lake City now versus what it was 2 years ago, it's shifted a lot in a lot of it. And so, as I'm trying to do business there, I might not have thought of broadcasting or communicating with people maybe through the tavern crawl magazine. That's a real thing now, in Salt Lake, and it wasn't before. So like, you just got to be paying attention to outlets. We got a good client
100%.
in Denver. I was with them on the phone. Our CTO just moved here from Denver 4 or 5 years ago, and they were talking about it's a franchise system that does flooring in the Denver area. They own the market in this certain channel. And our CTO's like, oh yeah, he's still on the radio. He's still doing their thing. Like it's this bit well-known local radio host / like service review platform. I've never heard of him. And everybody in Denver knows who he is. So if you're not working with that group, you're probably missing out on a lot of potential revenue to captivate your target audience. So you're right. There are so many examples of that. We could talk about that the whole time.
100%.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. That's great. A great insight. Let's pivot a little bit into content because content is still king, and both on the friend end and on the franchisee lead generation side. What could you share with us there, Gabriella, as far as insights people should be paying attention to and questions they should be asking?
Yeah. So questions you should be asking when you're doing your content that should constantly be reviewed and revised. Just plug there, you shouldn't have stagnant content for too long. You always want to be refreshed, but you need to think about number one, right? Like, has your user experience changed? And I would say with a lot of brands, it has in the past year, not in a better or for worse, but it's changed. The way that you might have contacted, interacted, going to a store, all of that has really been shaken up. So has your user experience changed and has your content reflected that change? The other thing is like same thing, it sounds silly, but has your services and products changed? In the past year, you've seen on the home services side, adding tons of new services, right? COVID cleaning, highly intense cleaning, sounds silly, but have you made sure you have content that reflects that? On the same side, what we've seen from a lot of, I know this just from going to a restaurant or QSR, they've made modified menus. And so not all of their regular types of food items are available all the time. Like I said, these sound very simple, but you need to make sure that your content's reflecting all of the changes that have been made. And that's why it is so important to stay up to date with your content and keep people engaged. I think the more that you keep it relevant, people are going to engage with you. And I think that goes for not just, imagery and content in that way, but also on your website and your GMB, your Google My Business. People don't realize that all of that, it gets lumped into one. Have you updated your website in the past year to make sure that things are reflecting where you're at with a brand, what you're doing to keep people safe, and if there are new services, products, or user experience? Have you made sure your GMB is up to date? I mean, there's so many locations I can tell you that modified their hours and maybe didn't realize that they set it on a default setting. And then, because of all the local changes, never updated it. And people think they're open, they're not. that is not something you want to be reflected on your brand, that someone goes to your store or tries to call you and it says you're open and you're not, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just, it's something that takes 2 seconds to do. And I think people lose sight of that because that's where people are at, right? You're Googling things, you're trying to search for what you need in the moment. And people rely heavily on GMB right now, making sure that it's up to date and making sure your website works. It sounds simple, but like make sure there's no broken links either. People, it matters now, right? Like the first thing people do is Google your company, Google your brand, Google their location. If you don't have a great website or if you don't have like engaging content,
Mm-hmm.
I'm nexting you. You could be the best thing, but sometimes when you see those older types of dinosaur types of sites, I mean, it makes you think about, okay, they haven't touched this in a long time. What's my experience going to be like? And that's how we think, and I think people need to realize how important that is, because that's your first impression of a business. Like that is literally your first impression. So it is so important to make sure that all of that is constantly refreshed, up to date, and engaging.
Oh yeah, no, we're well, we go back to the brand promise, right? And this is where people are misdelivering. Some of the best, I'd say some of the best service brands out there have been along for a long time, and sometimes their web properties are a little dated. And the experience is a little clunky, and that is the first impression. So the brand promise that you're giving people is, we're tough to work with and we're a little dated and slow, and yet couldn't be further from the truth on the service delivery side. But that's what everyone thinks of and abandons ship halfway through the process, because like, oh, but these guys over here, your competitors, they look modern and fresh. They might do terrible service, but I'm expecting more because that front end experience.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're smart. Tell me, I mean, just I imagine this stuff. Google constantly changes, right? And there was a period of time where everyone was trying to get a domain name with the word best in it, right? And now that's less important. But are you seeing some trends on what types of content people should be using that are going to help them maybe get more access to people or draw more people organically into their websites? Any advice on that for people?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends, obviously, specifically on the industry, right? So if you're thinking from a home services perspective, what we've noticed is the best way to at least climb the organic ladder, right, is finding ways to actually have your keywords also tagged, even if it's in images, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be best. It also has to be location. It sounds simple, but it's the same thing. Like you don't want someone, I'm in Jersey now. If I'm searching for something, I don't want someone from Philly to come on my page, right? So even just something as geographical tagging will help that organic search. And then on the same time, figuring out what it is that you are really good at and what you want to hone in on. So whether it's cleaning or HVAC or things of that nature, you need to have also original content on your sites for Google to actually pick up on the fact that you are your own business entity, because the more that it's duplicative, Google actually think that you're just a duplicate. So even if it's brand standard content, you have to be very unique in terms of how your local pages are addressing that attribute, because that's sometimes where a lot of brands miss the mark and don't realize that by copying and pasting, you're actually hurting yourself.
Oh yeah, like the microsites per location, or I mean, let's talk about one of their channel here. Let's talk about Porch or Thumbtack or Home Advisor or somebody who might have like a profile of their business or Yelp. If you could copy and paste all your content there or on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and Google's finding the exact same content on different pages, not helping you out. You've got to be unique across all of those. And a lot of brands I see copy paste. I'm like, your poor search engine optimization, you're pegging yourself. So
exactly. People think that they're helping themselves, but they don't realize how much they're hurting themselves. So you're spot on that part.
Oh, stop. I learned from the best. Hey, so let's talk about money for a minute, because everyone loves money, but in this case, we're talking about spending it, and people need to figure out how to diversify their spend, right? This is something that I think is pretty easy to discuss. You mind sharing a little bit about that, Gabrielle? Like where should people be thinking about diversifying? How do you know when you're not diverse enough with your spend? Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's funny because I think this is a hot topic, but it's a fluid topic. So if you think about it this way, we used to just say we have X amount of money, we're going to spend X here, Y here, Z there. Great, check a box. Now, with the amount of data and insights that we can regularly have access to, that bucket of money becomes more fluid throughout the year. So the cool thing is the more that you have the insights and the data, you can actually figure out, okay, is that channel working? No? Okay, let's try to figure out if this channel is doing really well for us. Let's throw more money on that. So I think what people need to start getting comfortable with is actually having a fluid type of diversification of your spend, if you would, versus that regimented. We have, 15% for TV, 20% for digital, right? Like that's the way of the old. I think that we're going to have to move into this very fluid type of mentality, and whether it's honestly as frequent as monthly, looking at, okay, is one channel performing higher than another? Should we put more money at that channel? And to your point, what we said before, there's so many new channels happening constantly. You need to figure out what just makes sense for you. I mean, there's obviously mobile, there's just digital, social. Then you have connected TV, streaming TV. You have all of the type of specific sites for, like, if you think about home services, like a Nextdoor and things of that nature. And all these are popping up, on the regular. So you need to be able to have your budget nimble enough that you can actually say, like, we have X amount of money, but we need to know that we're going to be trying things. And then when things are working, we're going to double down on those, versus just saying, we're only going to put this much into digital. And then you realize, oh, we're not getting the ROI we want. Oh, that's not good. And, you should take that money out, put it somewhere where it is working. So I think the biggest theme is you have to be fluid in this area. It might feel painful at first if you're not used to just having a constantly moving target, if you would. But, it's going to make you more successful long term, because if you see something working, why not throw more money at that? And if you see something not working, pull money out of that. And I think people don't realize that that's okay. And it is, give it enough time for the trial and error, but it's okay to pull out of certain channels if they don't work for you.
Oh yeah. I had an interesting conversation with a CMO, and I wish I could remember which one it was. It's been a few, but one thing that he was telling me is he has a certain budget every month that's not allocated marketing spend, so he can test new channels. And I think that's such a smart way to do it, because, as you mentioned, there's so many new ones popping up. I'll share a great one. I did a podcast with Ari Greenbaum over at Connects Pros. I'd never worked with him before until I found one of my clients was having a lot of success. See, on the back end, I don't mean to be pitchy here, but I get to see across hundreds of franchise brands and locations and things like that, which lead sources are they using and how are they converting? Like, I can just look at that data. I'm in their account talking to them, so I get a good feel. And I was seeing this was performing well, so I asked for an introduction from my franchise client, and then we had a great conversation and realized that they did things quite different. But a lot of people don't know who he is, and I tell you what, they outperform most of the big box lead producers in the home service space by a major margin. And so I feel like it's a smart approach too, just to have a certain amount of budget where you say, I'm going to use this to explore new channels, because we have to admit we don't know it all. And what was working 2 months ago might not be working as well as what's new today. So just a tip I'd throw out there that I thought was really smart from a guy who's been doing it a long time.
I like that. That's great.
But also measuring. This leads us into what I'd say our last topic, which is KPIs, managing data. I mean, what should people be asking themselves about their data, Gabrielle, that you're seeing people aren't as much as they should?
Yeah, so my colleague Jordan Wilson actually did an IFA roundtable. The topic was "The lead is dead," and it sounds really aggressive, but we had such a great conversation with the focus on KPIs and how to measure your performance.
Mhm.
And the reason why he was so gung-ho of saying the lead is dead is because what has happened is if you use that as your ride or die type of measurement tool, you aren't necessarily actually understanding how things are performing, mainly because lead is such a broad term and you could do so many actions to consider yourself a lead that actually are not meaningful. So something that we really talked about was there should be weights associated for your leads, right? So you can get one lead, but if you want to do the one-to-one, if I go on someone's website, for example, I'm looking at a potential prospect in the franchise space. I go on their website, maybe I click around, I click learn more. Am I a true candidate? No. Am I going to call? Do I want to be called on? No. But at the same time, in their system, I look like a lead. So there should be some types of weighting evaluation in terms of the actions you took. If I was a prospect and I called them, I downloaded a brochure, I did all of these other really strong actionable items, that should be a lead that's weighted more than me just clicking around the website. So something that I think is really important to ask yourself and ask your leadership team is, what is the most important actions that we want people to take that we need to measure against, right? So if you're a home services type of concept, obviously it's scheduling a consultation, right? That is what you want people, that is the action you want someone to take. Yeah, of course you could do that, someone calling, getting estimates. Chances are if that's what they're doing, they're probably getting estimates for multiple things. But if you truly wanted to say like, what is our 100% lead? It would be if they schedule that actual consultation, having them come out, having them do something, taking that really strong action item versus just trying to get a quote. So I think it's important for each industry and each franchise brand to understand what is the end all be all, like what would be our biggest ROI, and then work back from there. Okay, if we need to get X amount of scheduled consultations, we need people to call us, quote us, and kind of work your way back there. And I think the good thing is we have the data, as long as you have all the proper tracking measurements in place, assuming you do. But as long as your brands are set up that way, work backwards and understand, okay, if this is our ultimate goal is, make sure they're scheduling consultations, there's a job completed, what is your monthly revenue target? How many would you need to complete? How many calls do we need? And I think that it sounds simple, but sometimes you just have to understand you could work backwards in terms of how to hit your goals. So I think that you really need to reevaluate what is your most important KPI, and also what do we need to do to achieve that.
Yeah, I've got to share a nugget with you. I won't share any brand names here, but I will. It's a little bit of a jab, I guess, for Home Advisor. But it's only because of the way that they sell their leads, right? They sell 5 leads, the 1 lead to 5 people at a time, 4 people at a time. Sometimes it's a lot of people do it, right? It's the way they do business. Everybody knows it. So I don't mean to bag on them, but I was working with a client and that was their number 1 lead source. I don't know how much they spend per month with them, but if you look at the data, the actual data, you can see they are spending, they've got, I think it was like, I'll make up numbers, but I remember the percentages. It was like about 400 leads that they'd gotten. 80% of them got a quote, which means 80% of them, somebody was on site, gave them a quote. Somebody's using human capital to go and do these things. And of those 80% that got a quote, only like 20% closed. So you're talking about 16%, and actually that's pretty good. That's a pretty good number, a close rate overall for Home Advisor. We've got clients that do 46%, they close. But I'm just saying, like, you've got to look at your data across the spectrum too, because if you just look at how many appointments did I set, that's good. But if you look at how many of those appointments that were set actually close, there's an additional insight in there, right? Because in this one case, their churn, they were spending 80% of their effort chasing Home Advisor leads, but only 16% of them overall were closing. That human capital spend was costing them tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. Or if they would have said, let's put money into a lead source that converts at a higher rate, which requires less churn, they would actually make more money and spend less time chasing their tails. Now, there are ways to make that work better. So this is where I got to give them some advice and say, hey, I see a hole in your process. Let's fix it. Obviously, something's happening after you deliver the quote. We can automate that and follow up and make sure you make that 40%, so it's making more money for you. But conversation for another time. But metrics, KPIs, yeah, you hit a core value for me. I feel like people have to have better data, and if they're not looking at the whole spectrum of data, even pushing data back into their lead generation sources to figure out how much am I closing and how much revenue am I making? What's my cost per acquisition? Those things are critical, I think.
And what's scary, I'll say, is a lot of brands sometimes don't, like, they will know, but not the full picture. Because sometimes it's challenging when you have several vendors, doing little niche things in that process. It's sometimes hard to find what's the end all be all cost per acquisition, cost per lead, cost per call, our true ROI, when you have various vendors. So that's something else that I think you need to consider is, as you're doing your KPIs, do you have a strong way of transparency and reporting? If you are using multiple vendors to close that loop, to really know your metrics, you might know some of them, but you want to understand the full picture. And I'd say that's something in marketing for franchises you see a lot, is they might have different numbers for different vendors.
Yeah. And also knowing which metrics matter, because it's easy. A lot of people say, oh, well, I know how many, I look at my Google Analytics dashboard or my PPC dashboard, I can tell you what's going on. Like, well, you can tell me how many, what your cost per click was. You can tell me how many conversions you got, but now what's the rest of the story? And more often than not, I don't know, but I can tell you how many leads I sent to franchisees. I'm like, that's satisfactory, because that should not be satisfactory anymore. You need to know what's happening when you hand that lead off. The baton are these leads burning, or are they converting, or which lead sources? It's kind of a throw it on the wall approach a lot of times and see what sticks, because that worked well enough. But as the world's changing, pandemics are shifting markets, I feel like we have to get a lot more precise, or else we'll sometimes guess wrong, and that can hurt a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Gabriella, tell us, parting wisdom. What would you say if you're somebody looking for some marketing support, or you're some advice or some strategy? What are some good resources besides you, right? Because I think everyone would recognize that's the case. Any other places you'd recommend people look for advice?
Yeah, I would say that if you didn't have a chance to go to IFA Live, try to get some of the recorded sessions. I think there was a lot of great, especially from a marketing perspective, a lot of good panels that really touched on a lot of these topics in terms of people from Google or people from, those types of industries. And then on the flip side, from the franchise brands too. And, I think that it's just good to stay on top of the trends. As Dave mentioned, this is always evolving. There's so much innovation in the marketing space. Technology is totally taking over. So do whatever you can to stay relevant and to stay up to date. So if you haven't gone to IFA, try to purchase the pre-recording sessions, would definitely be one of them. IFA also puts out a lot of great content with a lot of their vendors and supplier partners around these topics. And then third, I'll plug it, but if you aren't on Clubhouse yet, I know that something that we're trying to do from a franchise marketing perspective. Heather McLeod is CMO of Authority Brands, and she created a franchise marketing club. And then we're trying to do some regular Franchise Fridays at noon Eastern to kind of do these informal roundtables and bubble up hot topics that we see happening, because every week something's changing, especially when it comes to Google and Facebook as just two forms of those big social channels. I would say that would be something else that would be helpful if you're on Clubhouse, Franchise Marketing Club, and try to join those rooms, because the goal is, let's find a way to keep everyone in touch and to talk about things just like we would if we were at a conference.
Yeah. And hopefully, looks like 2022 we'll be back together again live in San Diego with IFA, and hopefully some of the fall events will be live too. I certainly miss that. I feel like I get more sometimes in the hallway than I do in the sessions. And so
I
this is
agree
cool.
with you, Dave.
Not that the sessions are bad. Don't get me wrong. Like sessions are good, but sometimes you sit down, you're in the bar, the lobby bar talking to someone and you can just dive deep in a way that you can't when
Yeah,
you got 50 people in a session or more. Yeah.
I totally hear you. And like you said, it looks like the fall shows still plan to happen, which is so exciting. I am ready. Whatever the first one is at, I will make sure I'm there.
Same. Well, and in the interim though, right? I mean, might as well throw a bone to Sally and the folks over at Consumer Fusion. Check out the franchise tailgate thing, guys, because this is a really good
Yes.
community of an actual live get together. I'm not no live get together. It's a live get together.
Yeah, no air quotes. It's
Yeah,
real life.
it's real humans.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's franchisetailgate.com. Scorpion's actually a sponsor of all of them as well. The best part about it is it's just ways to get to people, network, different cities. We have comfort level bracelets. So whatever you feel is, your familiarity, if you're in for the hug or the elbow or the distance, everyone's okay. But honestly, just being able to be outside with a group of your friends that you haven't seen in a while. And like you said, just talk. You get a different type of conversation versus sometimes the Zoom conversation. So highly recommend it if it's in your city. Would love to see you there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks. I think it's a fair plug, but check it out, guys. Gabriella, you're fantastic. Thanks for joining us. And we'll have to do this again sometime. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great.
Yeah.